Hello everyone and welcome to Project Insights Agile Practice webinar. Our topic for today, Global Distributed Agile Teams, Internet of Things, and Microservices. Just a few things to note before we get started. All participants will be put on mute. However, any questions you have are more than welcome. Please go ahead and type those into your question box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar dashboard. Also try to answer all of your questions during the session, but if we can't, we'll make sure to get back to you through email. All of our PM trainings and Agile training sessions are valid for 1 PDU free of charge. However, you must be in attendance for the full session. I will email you your PDU certificate by the end of today, so please hold off on emailing me about your certificate until then. And for all other PDU information, please visit our PI community, type in PDU in the search, and you will find the PMI rules in an article called Webinars and PDUs. For those of you interested in today's recording and slides, they will also be sent to you via email by tomorrow. My name is Denise, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm on the marketing team here at Project Insight. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything else I can help you with, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. If you're not already familiar with Project Insight, we're a cloud-based project management solution. We work with two kinds of companies, those that are rapidly growing and need to scale the way they're managing their projects, and those who want greater visibility across their project portfolio, want more insight into the workloads of the resources, and want a better way to collaborate on projects among team members. If any of these sound familiar, you'd like to learn more, please feel free to contact us via phone, email, or you can always request your free demo at projectinsight.net. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our presenter today, Dr. Dave Cornelius. He's an experienced IT and business professional and a globally recognized lean and agile catalyst who empowers others to achieve the very best. He specializes in coaching, training, and leading co-located and distributed teams to deliver quality innovations from concept to cash. Dr. Dave has also held several leadership roles where he helped transform IT into a partner with other groups within the organization. He is also the founder of the 5 Saturdays program and leads the group's leadership council. Good morning, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. It's great to be here today again. So here we will begin. All right. Maybe I could get out of my moodiness. And as usual, we want to start off our day with looking at questions that people may have had from our previous webinar. So the last time we met, Sindhu has a question that says, is DevOps a process or a concept like Agile methodology? And so it's simply stated as that DevOps is a practice that encourages tools and automation to deliver software to customers frequently. The practice also encourages collaboration between IT operations and the development teams. So yeah, process, I think of it as more of a practice and less of a process or methodology because it leverages the goodness of agile practices and lean thinking and automation and tools to get things done. And then there was Peter. He says, I suppose it depends on the starting point, but how long does it take to move into a fully implemented DevOps/IT service management world, ITSM? And I believe it takes about 9 months to start, but in order for it to be fully integrated into your culture, this is something that's going to be an ongoing practice and an ongoing activity. So it's not as simple as a one-time shot. That just always continual improvement, continual learning, and it's something that you will have to pursue. But I think right about 9 months is where you could have DevOps and IT service management in play, with some people being trained and being able to execute those practices. And our final question is from Manoj, and he says, is there something for batch process integration on Unix Linux environment? And so a lot of people in the Unix Linux world are using this tool called Jenkins, which allows, and it's a cross-platform tool, so you could go out there and look at Jenkins, you could look at Chef, and those are some other tools that you could leverage to do DevOps with. I just wanted to respond back to the questions that people may have, and so we could get some good ideas. So I just wanted to begin by telling you that globally distributed Agile teams, it's becoming a norm now, and it's based on globalization and the availability of technical resources throughout the world. And I wanted us to begin the dialogue about thinking, if we began looking at globally distributed Agile teams in the same context of the Internet of Things and microservices, how would we approach? Because right now, most places, when you have distributed Agile teams, you have the developers maybe in the US, you have the testers over in India, you may have localization in China, and so you have teams, different parts of a team that are distributed, but you do not have full teams. So that's the context of our discussions today, and hopefully this will help you as you go forward and to build out, or you're working with teams, you have the ability to influence how you will you would use a different way of composing your teams to have a different composition. So let's talk about the agenda. In our agenda today, we're going to talk about globally distributed Agile teams, the Internet of Things called IoT, microservices, and we'll have a little bit about micro teams and sociocracy. And we'll get into the details of all of that. So what we want to do at the conclusion of this presentation, I want you to be able to develop a strategy to set up self-organizing global teams. We want to create practices to improve communications, maximize throughput with micro teams, and leverage sociocracy concepts so that you could build a healthier organization. One thing that I would like to share with you is that teams are complex systems, and they're there to deliver quality business value to engage organization and its survival in a global and competitive way. So when we think of systems thinking as a way, system thinking, emphasize this great practice of self-organization, where we integrate personal expertise, shared vision, and team learning. And we look at self-organization as the ability of a system to structure itself, to create new structure, to learn, or to diversify. Now, systems have feedback loops to help teams understand the complexity that they're dealing with. When you're building software or building any type of products where you have multiple teams, there's a certain amount of complexity that deals with communication, that deals with collaboration. So these feedback loops, as we use them, they come in two forms. They have a balancing and a reinforcing. So balancing loops, moves the current state to a desired state, and it kind of keeps things there. Now you have reinforcing loops, which influences more of the same actions, which may result in growth or decline. So I think of it as an example that, I like to eat bread and pasta, and a lot of people do. So in this context, if I was using a balancing loop, that would help me to limit the portions or to exercise to minimize weight gain. Now the reinforcing loop is to really help us to exercise regularly. Otherwise, I would gain weight from the calories from the high consumption of bread and pasta intake. So to build a high-performing teams that can execute strategy, you must develop this reflection and inquiry skills so that the real issues can be identified and open for discussion. right? So our teams need to engage in dialogue and conversation, and we have to look at the different behavioral patterns that we want to temper or dampen and the ones that we want to amplify. And so there's where you come in with these balancing feedback loops and the actions that we're taking. And this becomes very important as we deal with distributed teams, because in most cases, we're unable to see those people regularly, even with video conferencing. So let's get into what are Agile teams, and let's start looking at Agile teams in that context. See, Agile teams are meant to be co-located and not distributed. That's the original thought. And the purpose is to encourage cross-functional teams face-to-face to produce a sustainable business capability. The team should be self-organizing and capable of resolving impediments that may delay producing the business capability to compete really in a frequently changing marketplace. And so when you think about it, that this integration of people coming together to work is so that we could integrate our expertise, our shared vision, and really learning, which is a very key aspect of the Agile practice. And so feedback loops are also really great in terms of we could really manage our complexity. And so the teams meet daily to discuss impediments and progress made. So in that context, we're constantly learning, constantly giving each other guidance and even encouragement to get things done. So this is really the whole context and the idea between Agile teams. Now, when I think of the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things represents, the things connected to the Internet to inform interested parties about a specific outcome. So, for example, there's this thermostat called a Nest, and I think Google owns it now, but that unit is programmable, right? It's a programmable unit that's capable of monitoring and controlling the temperature in your home based on your desired criteria. And sometimes we may think about, you may ask me like, yeah, what does this have to do with anything? But when I think of the Internet of Things, or IoT, in the context of Agile teams, my perspective is that IoT is a complex system like Agile teams. And by studying the IoT patterns, we can discover that perhaps some of the behaviors and the actions and the way the way IoT is really constructed could really help us to think about how we deal with distributed teams. So there are patterns that we could discover that may help us to understand how we could help Agile teams to function independently, but yet contribute to a common outcome. And so as we think about looking at the Internet of Things, that it's communicating with other systems, even though it's sitting in your house, this is kind of the common context that we want to begin to start looking at distributed Agile teams, in that even though we have teams in different parts of the world, we still are able to communicate with each other in an effective way and get things done. The other systems that I wanted us to think about and experience is we want to think about microservices. And I know these are small independent systems and capable of delivering a very specific outcome. And so one of the things that I think about sometimes is that I think of a box of chocolate as a metaphor. And if you look at a box of chocolate, you may have different pieces. Each one have the capability of delighting a customer in a different way. And I just say, yum, yum. I really enjoy chocolate a lot. I hope you do too. But it's one of the contexts that we want to look at. And so it's a small and independent system. We get very specific outcomes that enables the business to have certain capabilities. Now, the thing is that by it being a small, self-contained entity, we could scale and we could produce the right outcome. And it's very loosely coupled, and just like you would have in how you would want essentially external teams to be constructed. And then there's a certain level of high cohesion because we're working toward a common goal. But with that in mind, that we're working toward a common goal, we should be able to contribute to a specific outcome. So as usual, I want to see if you're paying attention. I want to see if you're keep gathering this information. So let's have a little group exercise. So here's the question. What is the relationship between global Agile teams, IoT, and microservices? Let's see if you're paying attention. It's always interesting to think about how we could take different systems and compare them. And so you could compare and contrast exactly how are they similar and how are they different. Just trying to get a different way of looking for examples to help us to move forward in our context and practices of building teams. So what say we, Denise?
All right, let's see what we have here. All right, so 61% said A, complex systems, 22% said B, open loops, 12% said E, effective apps, and 5% said D, closed loops. What's the correct answer, Dave?
The correct answer is A. So most of you have been paying attention that they're all complex systems. Very good. That means we're paying attention, and now we could move along. And so I want to set a context and speak about, let's look at a global software organization with global software teams. And of course, we're going to have this company called What's the Weather? And the product that they produce is called intelligent thermostats. Now, the method that they will use to deliver products and services, mainly software, is lean thinking and agile practices. Now, the teams are distributed in the U.S. and California, Israel, and Australia. And if you've ever worked with distributed teams, there's always this great time zone challenge, right? So, the U.S. is 9 hours different than Israel, and Israel is 9 hours different from Australia. Now, just to illustrate, if we have California at 2 p.m., it's 11 p.m. in Israel, which is 8 a.m. in Australia. So someone is going to stay up late, someone is going to be up early, and this is just a challenge of being in these globally distributed teams where we tend to lose a lot of sleep and we have some pain in the process. So one of the biggest challenges that we get into is to begin to align teams and their deliverables across multiple time zones. I mean, I've certainly had that experience of having to deal with a team, with multiple teams in the U.S., in Australia, in Singapore, in China, in Canada, and I can't even remember the other place, but maybe somewhere on the East Coast in Pennsylvania. So you could just imagine the wonderful opportunity that I've had trying to align these teams and get them to work together in the same context and produce the same value. So Agile as a practice, it talks about co-location, and it wants teams to be together so that you could have this great face-to-face communication and interaction. So it's really important that when we're trying to build software, we're trying to build a product, and we're trying to get teams to work together, that there is this face-to-face interaction. And even though we have wonderful things like video conferencing, I mean, it's totally different, and it's not the same as when you could sit down in a small room with people having a dialogue about how to solve a problem. Now, in this context, we want to make sure that each teams are producing a customer value. There's this concept called Scrum of Scrums, which allow multiple teams to align their goals such that if there are dependencies and risk, we could begin to have those dialogues and start to plan exactly how will we resolve issues when we encounter them. Excuse me. The other thing is that because of the co-location practices, we want to make sure that the teams remove as many impediments and dependencies so that we could also reduce risk. And I know in Agile practice, many times most people kind of like miss the whole dialogue about risks and dependencies, but they do exist. So I want to look at a framework of also, besides just using the Agile practice, is how do we begin to think differently, think in such a way that we are encouraging teams to really self-organize, to be more effective, to be more resilient, and to really embrace a practice and a way of thinking and a way of doing work in a very agile way. So one thing it looks at as sociocracy is, you think of it as a framework. My apologies. I guess I was around someone last night at a conference who picked up a cold from his daughter, and it seems like I'm being affected by it today. Wow. So when we look at this, it's like there's a collaborative framework for evolving effective, resilient, and agile organizations where we want them to be semi-autonomous and totally self-organizing, where there's, what would I look at, an autonomy boundary where we know exactly the things that you can do as a team to really drive value. But we want teams to really begin to think and act in this way. And over time, people are iterating, and we're going through this every sprint, every 2 weeks. People are iterating and learning as they go along, right? And so oftentimes each team member is empowering the other to learn more. Now, as teams connect, we want to make sure that we could move information through the organization, not only in the teams that are doing the work, but generally you have customers internally and potentially externally that you need to connect to so that this information of the progress you're making, of the impediments you're facing, that you could go forward and begin to share that. And so we begin to align the organization towards shared motives and values, and so such that when you're successful, everyone celebrates. When you're not successful, everyone pitches in and said, well, how can we help so we can move forward and really achieve our goals, because everyone is impacted throughout the process. Now, we look at the amplification of individual development and learning, and I think that's really important because oftentimes in the Agile context, we only talk about teams. Teams are made up of individuals, and we need to empower and improve those individuals so they can work better as a team. A new concept that I've been playing with at work and also at my 5 Saturdays program is the concept of micro teams. One of the concepts of Agile is that we should have 7 plus or minus 2. So either it could be 7, or it could be 9, or it could be 5. I believe in smaller teams. I believe smaller teams reduce the risk of too many communication channels. And if you are a practicing project manager, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, of n times n minus 1 divided by 2. And so when you have teams that are too large and you have too many communication channels, so you often leave teams dysfunctional teams and members dysfunctional and sometimes often disillusioned. So when I think of a micro team, I'm thinking of teams that are 3 to 5 people, which to me is really ideal. I like a triad, a very small team of 3 people, bounded, and the way the composition of the teams is that it's centered on a quality-minded person. That person does not necessarily have to be someone in a QA role, but someone with a very quality-focused mind who's capable of doing test automation. And I know often those roles are relegated to QA resources. However, I think that in this practice, the way we're practicing it and the way I am teaching my teams is that we want to make sure that we have a limited number of communication channels. But one key thing is that we want to make sure that everyone tests and everyone is responsible for quality. So, and the thing is, when we talk about having smaller teams, having a limited number of communication channels, I like to think of 3 to 10. So if you have 3 people in a team, you only have 3 communication channels. If you have 5, you have 10. And so anywhere between there is just, to me, the right mix, the right number of people. And as I talked about, we wanted to have this built about a quality-minded person. So this enabled teams to be very self-contained and very self-organizing. This gives us the great capability to be able to have teams distributed in different parts of the world working on different things, but also working in a very cohesive way where we could use the Scrum of Scrum practices to bring those teams back together. Well, I've said a lot, so let's see where we are in terms of our next group engagement. Let's see what you have learned so far. So here is the engagement question. I would say Sociocracy 3.0 enable teams to be semi-autonomous and self-organizing. Sociocracy 3.0 enable teams to be semi-autonomous and self-organizing. What do you think? The wonderful news of this framework, where we allow people to evolve to be more effective, resilient, and the organization to become even more agile. The good news is that people can iterate and learn as they go. And the flow of information through the organizations where teams are fully connected, each aligning toward a shared motive and a set of goals. So Denise, how are we doing? Are we winning?
Let's share results. 92% said true and 8% said false.
Well, 92%, you're right on spot. So yes, it is true. It is true that sociocracy enables self-autonomous and self-organizing teams. So one of the roles as part of this big, great process is the product owner. And so the product owner is responsible in the whole Agile mix for connecting with the customer, prioritizing the customer wants, making sure that we have an acceptance criteria or a set of criteria for the customer and what they want. So one of the things is like the product owner in this process, when we have global teams, is that they're going to get the brunt of the multi-team interaction, because normally in these contexts, the product owner will have to find a way of how to share information. And then in our little case, where we have a team in California, Israel, and Australia, they have to find a way to share information. And so I think they have to be more creative in how they go about doing this. One of my recommendations to most product owners is to use high-fidelity content, which would enable them to share information with teams without having to always be available for questions. So what I'm talking about high-fidelity content is creating small little videos, going out and taking pictures of some of the context, which could be a customer environment, it could be screen grabs, and tie them together and tell a story. And so this helps us to describe exactly what are the requirements, much easier for teams. And so the teams could sit down and spend time on their own reviewing the requirements in a high-rich environment on their computer, or maybe even in a conference, begin to have dialogue, and how do we approach solving this problem that we have, or this new opportunity. Now, also, the product owner, in terms of their creativity, may have to need to delegate some authority to proxies. And if we have teams in California and the product owners in California, then perhaps he needs to have 2 proxies, one that sits in Israel and one that sits in Australia, where they could distribute that work to those individuals and said, okay, I'm going to meet with you guys, and really you guys are going to act on my behalf with the teams as a product owner to help them understand exactly the context of the customer. And as part of that exercise, the product owner will have to learn how to break things into smaller and independent outcomes. And this is always a challenge for most product owners because, most think of things in really big ways. And to get down to where we're dealing with micro teams, we're dealing with small subset of independent teams, you may have to break the work up where if you're building like a customer relationship management system where some teams are working on the front end, right, and the screens or the web interface. Some pieces are working on maybe the middle part where we have all of our business rules, and maybe another team is working on the back end where you have most of your database and some of its patterns going on there. So there are different ways that the product owner is going to have to think about that, and maybe he may even think about it in the context that we may have these teams working on one functional area together, but just different parts. And so with that, he's going to have to come up with a different way of how he produces an outcome and get people engaged to get things done. Now, one of the cool things is now we need to build out a team. And if in this context where we have this scenario of what's the weather, there's going to be 3 teams that we need, one for each location in California, Sydney, and Tel Aviv. And so Sydney, Australia, and Tel Aviv, Israel. So the composition of the team would be at least 1 test engineer and 2 developers per team. We also need a scrum master. And when you think of a scrum master and their role, the scrum master is actually responsible to help the teams navigate the scrum practice and also to remove impediments. So it's very important to have a scrum master in each location so he can help the team move things along and make sure that they're not stuck. And so that's one of the key things that happens sometimes with teams, that they become stuck and they need someone to help them to see things in a different way. So let's look at the composition of the teams and what that would look like. So when we have Team California, and so we would have 1 test automation engineer, 2 developers, and 1 scrum master. Sydney would have exactly pretty much the same configuration. Tel Aviv would be the same, 1 test automation engineer, 2 developers, and 1 scrum master. Now, as we talked about, the burden of the product owner, where they have to prioritize work for the 3 teams. They have to figure out exactly how are we going to distribute this work so that each team can function independently. They can be self-contained and provide a value back to the organization. So that's essential, and it puts a lot more pressure. But the good news is, I spoke about the product owner having proxies. Proxies are very important, and proxies will help the product owner with some of the stresses. But we also talk about high fidelity content, where if most product owners sat down and spent some time putting together the customer wants and demands using high fidelity content, it would be a lot easier. We live in a world where our phones is a very powerful device. Our mobile phones, you could go out and take pictures and videos, and you could even record audio on there. So it gives you, as a product owner, a great opportunity that if you're out there visiting customers, with their permission, you could begin to start capturing elements of their environment that would create a different context for the people building software, which I call the builders of things. So with that composition, with the product owners working with these distributed teams, you may be able to begin to envision how each team could produce an outcome even though they're part of a connected fiber, that each team will produce an outcome that contributes to the whole. Now, as we go through the process of engaging some of the Scrum practices, some of the Agile practices, there's these series of ceremonies and meetings that the team need to have, which helps to build cohesion, by the way, And it helps to build a continuous way of how people could share information across the teams. So let's look at that. Let's look at the meeting and ceremonies that we will engage with and encounter. So when we think about it, that teams will use these Agile ceremonies and meetings to enable face-to-face communication and support for each other in the team. So the first thing that we would have is a daily 15-minute stand-up meeting per team. And it's a very simple meeting where each person gets an opportunity to speak and the rest listen. 3 simple questions. What did I do yesterday? What do I plan to do today? And what are the impediments that's really blocking me from being successful? In that simple answering those 3 questions, we are committing and communicating to our teams the work that we planned to do yesterday. We got that done. We're taking something on new today, and if there's a problem, an impediment, something that's blocking us from success, it gives information and guidance to the Scrum Master to go out and help them to resolve those impediments. And you may say, well, what could some of those impediments be? Well, it could be something like I requested a new environment, or we requested a new environment, and it's taken a lot longer than anticipated. Well, we need to get that done. So the Scrum Master could take on that role, an opportunity to remove that impediment. The other meeting and ceremony that we have is that we're going to live in a 2-week sprint cadence. So every 2 weeks, we will have completed work. We commit to a certain amount of work. We'll get that done every 2 weeks. This is common in Agile. This is a very common practice. Now, because our teams are distributed, we have a team in California, one in Sydney, and one in Tel Aviv. It's going to be very important that we have scrum of scrums between the 3 teams. And what this does is to help the 3 teams to realign. So there's going to be a little bit of pain, a little bit, where people have to deal with 2 p.m. California, 11 p.m. Tel Aviv, and 8 a.m. Australia. Or maybe you may swing it a little bit differently, but someone is going to have pain at least twice a week. Or you may even do it once a week. But what goes on in a Scrum of Scrums meeting is that you ask simple questions. You ask them almost the same questions that you would do in a daily 15-minute stand-up. But I like to twist it a little bit differently in asking the question of what did I build that is breaking someone else? And so that speaks to dependencies. What did I build that would help others? So that's speaking in how can I collaborate and begin to contribute to the whole organization of these 3 teams such that we could get better. And so the Scrum of Scrums, asking those 2 different questions. And then the third is that what are the things that are blocking me from success? And there could be many things in the Scrum of Scrums when you have 3 teams, maybe one working on the presentation to like the web interface or the website, the other part working on the business logic, and the other part working on the back end. You could see that they could be different times where the front end who's working on a web page may be working on a business rule, so that may be a blocker, something that is stopping that team from being successful. So in simply asking these questions is, what did I build that are breaking, that could potentially break one of the other teams? We're announcing and communicating to the team members that, hey, I just built this. I don't know if you guys have tested it yet, but I just want to let you know so that you could have a heads up on that. And and the second thing is that what did I build that could really contribute and help the team get better is another way of looking, how do I contribute to the community such that, oh yeah, I could use that tool. Let me try that tool out that you just built for migrating data or cleaning the database or maybe even producing test data. It's that kind of sharing that happens. Now, at the end of every sprint, we have a sprint review per team. So now the team goes back and they're by themselves in their each location. So this is where we bring customers in at the end of the 2-week sprint cadence, and we get to share. We get to share back with our customers. We committed to do a certain amount of work. Now, here's what we've completed. Can you please review it and let us know if this is good? This is the rapid feedback that we get with the practice of Agile. And this is the rapid feedback we get for customers as well, which demands their engagement. Generally, in the practice of waterfall, most organizations, most customers, they come in at the very beginning of a kickoff, and then you don't see them again for maybe 6 or so months. Then they come back and kick the tires, and then you may see them again maybe within another 3 or 6 months after that. No, every 2 weeks the customer is expected to be there, to show up, to also show that they have skin in the game, because at the end of the day, those systems are going to impact them. Retrospectives. Now, retrospectives is a great tool. It's a great tool for reevaluating what you've done, reevaluating of where you can go. And so it's a great way to reflect and to build continual learning into the practice. Retrospective is one of the things that not only could you use this in software, but you could use this in any other type of disciplines that you may choose to. And retrospectives simply ask us to look at things. There are many different practices for this. And one simple way you could have these 3 different categories, 3 columns. What do I want to stop? What do I want to start? And what do I want to keep? Really simple. What are the things that I want to start to do to make our teams better? What are the things that we want to stop doing that's really impacting the team? And what are the things that we're doing that's really great and awesome that we want to keep? And as you could see, in just that context alone, that you have 3 different actions that you could take, and out of this meeting, these are areas for us to improve. So we take that with us as we go forward. So if you're really looking at the migration and the way we're trying to develop small micro teams living in different parts of the world, everyone are using the same practice. Everyone are using the same practice so that they can become better in a very consistent way. And now we're beginning to streamline how we communicate, common language, common approach as we get things done. So there's a great benefit to the organization. There's a great benefit to the organization when we look at things differently and we begin to practice things in a common way where our language is really the same. So let's look at some of these benefits. And we think that the organization, there's a great benefit to them in a very significant way when teams are able to deliver frequent customer value. And so one of the things that we ask that teams do is that, you got to deliver customer value. And we have to do that every 2 weeks, whether you're in California, Sydney, or Tel Aviv. Even though one of the things that I've seen that most people do is, like I said, we have developers in maybe sometimes the configuration or the composition of the teams are, we have team members in California, team members in another part of the world. So you may have development in California and testing in like, say, India or China. And even they may flip the reverse and said, okay, well, we're going to do development over there and do testing on site. So now, could you imagine the pain that people have to endure? The pain of having to be up late at night, early in the morning, trying to deal with cultural barriers. Now, with small independent teams, we begin to reduce the amount of dependencies on the team and the impact. Now, as a product owner, they have a great opportunity to maximize the right value at the right time, right? Because we could throttle teams differently. Now, he has 3 independent teams, 3 independent small teams that are self-contained, capable of delivering the value that we want for the organization. The one great thing is, like, teams are not living in multiple time zones. I've had the great experience of having to do this where I'm up at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night, and sometimes the next day I have to be up at 5 or 6 in the morning having another call. So, I'm working all day long, almost 24/7, which is not a healthy thing, just to tell you, because you begin to lose context with your family, you begin to lose context with your community, and more importantly, you begin to lose context with yourself because you're fully consumed by trying to live across multiple time zones. And it's not sustainable. I know for sure personally it hasn't been sustainable for me. Now what the wonderful thing of having these small micro teams that are fully distributed, now we could have independent and scalable teams. We don't have the great dependency that we have sometimes the way people are configuring their teams of having some developers here or some testers there. Why not make fully self-contained whole teams where you have a dev, test, and scrum master in each location? And guess what? This produces accountability and it produces a sense of ownership. You know, that's another benefit that we get from having micro teams in distributed locations. Well, let's look at our another engagement. I want to see if you guys have been paying attention or if I've just been putting you guys to sleep. So let's see. So select the benefit of independent micro teams. Which one is it? Is it A, people are not catching colds from each other? B, Scrum Masters remove impediments? C, product owners become smarter? D, teams are not living on multiple time zones daily? What are the benefits to micro teams? Let's see if we're pushing the envelope here and see if people are fully aware. Let's see what they got, Denise.
Okay. Let's see here. 4% said A, people are not catching colds from each other. 27% said B, Scrum Masters remove impediments. 6% said C, product owners become smarter. And 64% said D, teams are not living in multiple time zones daily.
Oh, yes, the answer is D. Teams are not living on multiple time zones, which is a great benefit. Daily, and I think that's the most important word, is daily. Even though at some point in the process that teams have to experience multiple time zones, they're not doing it on a daily basis. So if it's just once a week or twice a week, that's something that's palatable. So great. So let's talk in summary, since we're bringing this to a close. I want to tell you that global teams are co-located, self-contained, and self-organizing. Even though they're spread across multiple time zones, each team is self-organized and self-contained. I'm a big fan of micro teams. This is the things that I'm talking about now, something I'm writing about in terms of having smaller teams and the importance of having these small teams that are well composed of the right people to get the job done. I think it's very ideal to help the organization to be successful. But also system thinking teams, we want to be able to respond effectively to change, to look at, how do we leverage our feedback loop to make the right actions to balance things out or to reinforce the things that we want to get done. I love sociocracy, where we're beginning to think of how do we continue to evolve, change effectively, to become resilient and really impact our organization so that we do have agile organizations, because a lot of time we just have agile teams. We don't have agile organizations. So a much bigger picture than we're used to. And also the Internet of Things, IoT, and microservices are, we look at those as complex systems, which may help us to model teams to be more independent. Well, that's it for me. That's what I have for you today. So I think we may have time to have maybe a few questions before we close. Are there any questions that's burning right now that you think that I didn't answer and you need to clarify?
In the meantime, we do have some questions pending for you. So here goes the first one. It says, is it possible to have one product manager and one product owner on the same team?
a project manager and a product owner on the
No,
same team?
product manager. Product manager and product owner on the same team.
Yes, yes, of course. You treat the composition because the roles are different. The product manager is more customer facing, and in most compositions that I've seen, team compositions like this, is that the product manager is out there traveling, meeting with different customers, having workshops, gathering information, and the product owner, it's more focused on the team. So the relationship is between the product manager and product owner, right? Because each one still represents the customer, but just in a different context or at a different degree. So yes, you definitely could have that.
Follow-up to that question, can this be the same person?
Oh my God, I am experiencing that right now, and it's not working out. I could tell you this much. It's just not working out. The product manager is stretched to the hilt. They're unable to give the attention needed to the teams, and it's really a hard thing for one person to be both. Because if you're traveling somewhere else in the world for a week or two at a time, it's impossible for you to be focused on the needs of the customer specifically that needs to be translated back to the team. So I've seen organizations do it. I advise against it. I would prefer to have a product manager and a product owner where they're two discrete roles.
Awesome, thank you. Next question. I'm a product owner and my team has doubled in size. Any tips or suggestions?
Micro teams. Micro team is the thing. If your team is doubled in size, work with your Scrum Master. So look, how can we break these teams into smaller micro teams where there are 3 to 5 people, where they're centered around a quality mind, centered around 1 or 2 quality minded individuals. And the reason why I speak to quality-minded individuals and things are centered around them is that because I could do a pairing of 2 developers to 1, let's call them a tester or software or test engineer. I could do that level of pairing, which is a very healthy pairing, because as we're going through this process of building products, we're having dialogues about how do we build quality in, and that quality-minded person could start to lead the dialogue about quality in terms of if we're doing things like test-driven development. And I know I haven't introduced this as a concept in any of the talks, but this is a very important practice where if they're using test-driven development, that quality-minded person could begin to have those dialogues with the developers on a daily basis, on a story basis that gives you a way to improve how you produce quality. But I would say break your teams up, make them smaller. Even though you're working on the same product, you could break them up into triads, and that would be a significant difference. I could tell you that my teams right now are so much happier that they're smaller. There's a small community, and the reality is, the composition does not have to be the same forever. I do not believe in keeping teams together forever. I figure 2 quarters is probably as much as you probably want to keep teams together, unless there's something so large that it's necessary to have it longer than that. But that's what I would recommend, is to leverage micro teams. Talk to your Scrum Master and see how you guys could work that out.
Awesome, thank you. And just one last question before we end today's session. Is there a benefit to mixing up the micro teams over a period of time zones? I'm sorry, let me read that. Is there a benefit to mixing up the micro teams over a period of time if time zones are not a problem? Changing players across micro teams?
No, I think there's a wonderful concept called re-teaming. That concept of where you begin to shift members from different teams, and there are different ways you could do that. You could tell them, that's one way, being prescriptive about it. the other way is for people, you allow the teams to select who they want to work with. And so, yes, you could shift members around. I really believe in that reality where people do not become stagnant and become too comfortable, always doing the same thing all the time. And it's important for us to have cross-training where we have knowledge distributed across multiple people within the organization. And it's also strength building where people are encouraged to learn more. So, yeah, mix them up. Over time, I like to use 2 quarters as a good boundary where they learn just enough, and let's shift them out to do other things for another 2 quarters. And, I do that. Right now I don't have time zones issues, so I still do that, and we'll continue to use that to leverage micro teams as a benefit.
Thank you so much for that. So I'll let you finish up with some of your closing slides.
Okay. I want to talk to you about KnowledgeShare. Get out to our site. We blog out there. We offer different things for leadership and agility training, help you guys to get from concept to cash. Go to knowledgeshare.org. Also, I have a book and game on Amazon. The title is Transforming Your Leadership Character, The Lean Thinking and Agility Way. This book will really help you as a leader or as you walk into leadership. I also have a game called Agility Leader Shift that really fosters collaborative learning. So go out and check it out at Amazon.com. I run an education program that we empower students to learn agility and innovation. We encourage you to get involved. Start a 5 Saturdays program in your community. You could donate time and money to our program. This is really helpful. And also, I'm doing a podcast. I just did, if you guys ever read the book Managing for Happiness by Jorgen Appello, I interview different industry experts. We have different dialogue about different things. You could go to grokshare.com. And also, you could find it on the KnowledgeShare with Dr. Dave on iTunes and Google Play. So there's an opportunity for more learning if you want to. So go out and check out grokshare.com. There's lots of podcasts out there about different topics. Some of the topics that we speak about here is also there as well on grokshare.com. And so feel free to reach out to me if you need to at customercare@knowledgeshare.org or do a tweet at KnowledgeShare. So now we'll turn it over to Denise.
Thank you. All right, guys. To earn your PDU, you will automatically receive your PDU certificate via email towards the end of the day. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything else I can help you with, please feel free to reach me at denise.rodriguez@projectinsight.com. You will earn 1 PDU per webinar attended. To register your PDUs, log into PMI and fill out all the information below. This information will also be available within your PDU certificate. For those of you on social media, I'd like to invite you to follow, like, and subscribe to our social media channels. Our handle on Twitter is @ProjectInsight. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for the latest in PI news. In our Project Insight community, you'll find many recorded videos and webinars for you to watch and learn from. You can sign up for your next IT methodology or Agile webinar. We also have project management training, leadership, and product training. They are all completely free of charge. Go ahead and check out our webinar calendar today and register for as many as you'd like. Until next time, I'd like to thank Dave for a great session. And of course, thank our audience for the great questions, great comments, and we do hope to see you guys next time. So have a great weekend and take care.
Thank you. Bye, Denise.